By late 1943, the war in the Atlantic appeared to be won. The Allied navies, a sprawling leviathan of steel and science, had turned the tide. The German U-boat, once the apex predator of the high seas, was now the hunted. A sophisticated net of high-frequency direction-finding, long-range patrol bombers, escort carriers and ever-improving sonar had been woven across the ocean. For a German submariner, a single radio transmission, a brief moment on the surface, or the telltale plume of a diesel engine was a death sentence. The life expectancy of a U-boat crew was measured in weeks. The Allies believed, with good reason, that they had solved the problem of the submarine. But what if the problem changed? What if the fundamental rules of undersea warfare, rules the Allies had spent 4 years and countless lives mastering, were about to be rewritten? What if a new kind of U-boat was being born in the bombed-out shipyards of the collapsing Third Reich? A submarine that did not need to surface. A submarine that could sprint faster underwater than the destroyers hunting it could travel on the surface. A submarine that could launch a devastating volley of torpedoes and then simply vanish. This was the impossible crisis facing the Allies in the final year of the war. They had built the perfect trap, but they were about to face a ghost that could swim right through it. This is the story of the Type XXI Elektroboot, the sunken ghost that almost reset the clock on the Battle of the Atlantic. To understand the revolution, we must first understand the grim reality it was born from. By mid-1943, Karl Donitz's U-boat arm was in a state of catastrophic collapse. The period the Germans called Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time, was a distant, almost mythical memory. The Atlantic was no longer a happy hunting ground. It was a slaughterhouse. Allied technological and tactical superiority was absolute. The British invention of centimetric radar, small enough to be fitted to aircraft, meant a U-boat could be detected on the surface from miles away day or night in any weather. The consolidated B-24 Liberator, with its immense range, could patrol the mid-Atlantic gap that had once been a U-boat sanctuary. Many were equipped with the Lee light, a powerful 22 million candela searchlight that could illuminate a surfaced U-boat in the dead of night, giving the crew mere seconds of warning before a salvo of depth charges rained down. Allied escort groups, no longer tied to convoys, were formed into aggressive hunter-killer groups, equipped with advanced ASDIC, what the Americans called sonar, and weapons like the Hedgehog spigot mortar, which fired contact-fused projectiles. Ahead of the ship, they could prosecute an underwater contact with relentless, terrifying efficiency. The old U-boat tactic of surfacing at night to use its superior surface speed to attack and escape was now suicidal. The tactic of diving to escape was equally perilous. A Type XXI U-boat, the workhorse of the Kriegsmarine, could manage perhaps 7 knots underwater, and only for about an hour before its batteries were exhausted. A Flower-class corvette could make 16 knots and could hound it for days. The math was simple, and it was brutal. Donitz saw his elite force being systematically annihilated. He pleaded for new technologies, for a Wunderwaffe, a wonder weapon, to turn the tide. The German naval command, however, had been fixated on a single, almost fantastical solution for years, a concept championed by a brilliant but difficult engineer named Helmut Walter. Walter's vision was not just for a better submarine, but for a true asterisk submarine. He envisioned a vessel that didn't rely on diesel engines and batteries at all. His engine used a highly unstable and violently reactive fuel, high-test hydrogen peroxide, known as perhydrol. When perhydrol was passed over a catalyst, it decomposed explosively into superheated steam and oxygen at over 900 degrees Celsius. This steam would drive a turbine, generating immense power, with the only exhaust being more steam and oxygen, which could be vented underwater. It was the holy grail, air-independent propulsion. A submarine with a Walter turbine could, in theory, stay submerged indefinitely and achieve breathtaking underwater speeds of over 25 knots. It was a technological leap of decades. The Kriegsmarine was so enamored with this idea that they commissioned a series of experimental boats, culminating in the Type XVII. These were small, purely experimental craft, but they proved the concept worked. The prototype V80, launched in 1940, hit a submerged speed of 28 knots, a record that would stand for over a decade, but the Walter engine was a nightmare. The perhydrol fuel was incredibly dangerous, corrosive, and prone to catastrophic explosion. It was expensive to produce, and the engine itself was complex and mechanically unreliable. The range was poor. It was a thoroughbred racehorse engine, not a workhorse for a war of attrition. By 1943, With the U-boat force bleeding out, it was clear that the perfect water boat would not be ready in time. A more pragmatic solution was needed, and it was needed yesterday. A committee was formed, bringing together the best submarine designers and engineers in Germany. They took the radical, streamlined hull shape designed for the water-powered Type XXI and married it to a propulsion system that was a radical evolution of existing technology. This hybrid concept became the Type XXI. The Type XXI did not look like any U-boat that had come before it. Previous designs, like the iconic Type XXI, were fundamentally surface ships that could submerge for limited periods. Their hulls were cluttered with railings, bollards, and a large deck gun. They had a flat deck and a sharp prow, optimized for surface running. The Type XXI was the opposite. Its design philosophy was centered on one thing: underwater performance. The hull was a clean teardrop shape, free of all external clutter. The deck gun was eliminated entirely. It was useless for a submarine that was never meant to fight on the surface. The hull itself was a novel figure-8 cross-section, with the upper lobe for the crew and command spaces, and the lower lobe dedicated almost entirely to batteries. The conning tower, or sail, was a gracefully blended and streamlined fairing, containing only the periscopes, snorkel, and radar antenna, designed to create minimal hydrodynamic drag. Everything about its external form was sacrificed for speed and silence beneath the waves. The true revolution, however, was inside. The Type XXI carried a staggering number of battery cells. A Type 7C had 124 cells, giving it a total power of 9,160 ampere-hours. The Type XXI carried 372 cells, delivering 33,900 ampere-hours, more than 3 times the electrical power. This immense reservoir of energy, combined with the low-drag hull and powerful new electric motors, gave it capabilities that were simply science fiction to Allied commanders. On its diesel engines, it could cruise on the surface at a respectable 15 knots. But underwater, it was a predator transformed. It could cruise silently at 5 knots for 2 or 3 days before needing to recharge. And when it needed to sprint, it could unleash a burst of speed topping 17 knots for over an hour. An Allied destroyer escort's top speed was around 20 knots. This meant for the first time in history, a submarine could outrun many of its pursuers underwater. It could maneuver to attack a fast-moving convoy from any angle, and more importantly, it could escape a counterattack not just by diving deep, but by simply running away. This incredible underwater performance was made sustainable by the perfection of another key technology, the snorkel or snorkel. The snorkel was a simple but ingenious Dutch invention that Germany had captured and refined. It was essentially a retractable air intake and exhaust pipe that could be raised to the surface while the submarine remained at periscope depth. This allowed the U-boat to run its diesel engines while submerged, cruising underwater, and recharging its massive batteries without ever having to surface and expose itself to radar. The snorkel mast was coated in anti-radar rubber and was incredibly difficult to spot, especially in a moderate sea. A Type XXI could leave its base in Norway, cross the entire North Sea, patrol the British coast, and return all without ever fully surfacing. It could remain a ghost, a submerged entity for its entire patrol. The offensive capabilities of the Type XXI were just as revolutionary. It was equipped with 6 bow torpedo tubes, all located in the nose. The reload process, a slow, manual, and laborious task on older boats, was now automated. An advanced hydraulic system could ram a full set of reloads into the tubes in a matter of minutes. A Type XXI could fire an initial salvo of 6 torpedoes, dive, reload, and be ready to fire another 6 in less time than it took a Type 7 to manually reload a single tube. In total, it could fire 18 torpedoes in under 20 minutes, a concentration of firepower that was previously unimaginable. Furthermore, it was designed from the ground up to use a new generation of sensors. The periscope, the traditional eye of the submarine, was now a secondary tool. The primary sensor was an advanced passive hydrophone array, the Gruppenhochgerät, or GHG. This circular array of 48 hydrophones mounted on the chin of the boat allowed a well-trained sonar operator to detect, classify, and track the bearing and speed of enemy ships from over 20 kilometers away. The data from the GHG was fed into an analog fire control computer that could calculate a firing solution without the U-boat ever needing to raise its periscope and risk detection. It could hear its prey, stalk it from the depths, and kill it, all while remaining completely blind and completely invisible. The vision was breathtaking. A wolf pack of Type XXIs, moving at high speed underwater, communicating via underwater telephone, and coordinating silent sonar-guided attacks, would have been unstoppable. It would have rendered the entire Allied anti-submarine warfare doctrine, a doctrine built around finding and killing slow surface-bound U-boats, obsolete overnight. The problem was building them. By 1944, Germany was being systematically dismantled from the air. Allied bombing campaigns had flattened industrial centers and shattered transportation networks. To build a weapon as complex as the Type 21 in such conditions seemed impossible. Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, turned to a radical new method of production, one borrowed from American shipyards: prefabrication. Instead of building each U-boat from the keel up in a single shipyard slipway, a process that could take nearly a year, the Type 21 was broken down into 8 distinct transportable sections. Section 1 was the stern with its control surfaces. Section 3 contained the diesel engine room. Section 4 held the electric motors. Section 6 was the control room and conning tower. Section 8, the bow, held the torpedo tubes and forward hydroplanes. These massive steel sections were to be built in inland factories, far from the heavily bombed coastal shipyards, by companies that had previously built locomotives or steel bridges. Once completed, these 30 to 50-ton sections would be transported on Germany's extensive network of canals and rivers to one of 3 final assembly shipyards: Blohm and Voss in Hamburg, Agweser in Bremen, and Schickei-Werke in Danzig. There, like giant pieces of a puzzle, they would be welded together, fitted out, and launched. The planned production rate was staggering: 33 boats per month. It was an industrial gamble of epic proportions, a desperate race against the clock and the relentless bombing. The reality was a logistical nightmare. The inland factories, while safer, were still targeted. The canals, the arteries of the entire system, were a primary objective for Allied bombers. A single well-placed bomb could sever a key waterway, leaving dozens of completed U-boat sections stranded hundreds of miles from the sea. Quality control was a constant struggle. Sections built by different factories often didn't align properly, requiring extensive and time-consuming rework at the assembly yards. And behind the scenes, the entire enterprise was fueled by the brutal exploitation of forced and slave labor, a dark stain on this technological marvel. Despite the chaos, the system began to produce results. By the spring of 1945, 118 Type 21s had been assembled and launched. But launching a boat is not the same as sending it to war. The new submarines were plagued with defects from the rushed production. Hydraulic systems leaked, welds failed, and the complex electrical systems were unreliable. The crews, many of them hastily trained novices, struggled to master the incredibly advanced technology. The Allied mining of the Baltic Sea and the relentless air attacks on the training areas meant that working up a new boat and crew to combat readiness was a deadly ordeal in itself. Of the 118 boats launched, only 2 would ever conduct a combat patrol. One of those was U-2511, commanded by one of Germany's most experienced aces, Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee. Schnee was a recipient of the Knight's Cross with Oak Leaves, a veteran of the happy times who had seen the war in the Atlantic turn from triumph to slaughter. He was given command of U-2511, one of the first combat-ready Type 21s, and in late April 1945, he departed from Norway for the Caribbean. The war was days from ending, but no one on board knew that. For them, this was the first test of the weapon that was meant to save the U-boat arm. Schnee immediately put the boat through its paces. He remained submerged constantly, running on the snorkel to charge his batteries. He practiced high-speed sprints, evasive maneuvers, and silent running. He was astounded. The boat handled like nothing he had ever commanded. It was quiet, fast, and responsive. He easily evaded British anti-submarine patrols that passed directly overhead, their Aztec sweeps washing over his deep, silent hull without a single returning ping. He was a phantom. On May 4th, just hours before Donitz would issue the final ceasefire order to all U-boats, Schnee's sonar operator reported a contact, a group of British warships. As they closed, Schnee cautiously raised the periscope. Through the lens he saw his ultimate target, the heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk, surrounded by a screen of destroyers. In his old Type 7, an attack on a well-escorted warship like this would have been a near-suicidal proposition. He would have had to get ahead of the task force on the surface, dive, and hope for a lucky shot as they passed. But in the U-2511 the rules were different. Schnee submerged to deep attack depth and brought the boat to silent running. Using only his GHG sonar array, he plotted the course and speed of the cruiser. He then ordered a high-speed underwater sprint, easily moving into a perfect firing position ahead and inside the destroyer screen. The British sonar operators heard nothing. The destroyers steamed on, completely oblivious. Schnee brought U-2511 back to periscope depth for a final look. The sight was breathtaking. He was just 500 meters from the flank of the massive British cruiser. He had penetrated the escort screen completely undetected. The outer torpedo doors were open. The fire control computer had a perfect solution. He had the warship dead to rights. In the tense silence of the control room, his crew waited for the command to fire. But the command never came. Moments earlier, Schnee had received the fragmented ceasefire order from Admiral Donitz. The war was over. Firing now would be a pointless act of murder. With immense discipline, Schnee lowered the periscope, ordered the boat deep, and slipped away, passing silently under the keels of the British destroyers. He had not fired a shot, but he had proven everything. The Type 21 was not a theoretical weapon. It was a ghost. It could go where it wanted, kill what it wanted, and vanish without a trace. Had the war lasted just 6 months longer, had wolf packs of these Elektroboots reached the Atlantic in numbers, the cost to the Allies would have been unimaginable. The war ended before the Type 21 could make its bloody debut. Most of the completed boats were scuttled by their own crews in German harbors. But the story does not end there. When the Allies entered the shipyards at Hamburg and Bremen, they were stunned by what they found. They discovered not just the scuttled boats, but the entire modular production line, the blueprints and the engineers. They raised several of the sunken U-boats, including U-2513 and U-3008, which were taken to the United States for intense study. The British and the Soviets did the same. What they learned from dissecting these Elektroboots fundamentally altered the course of naval history. The Type 21's core principles, the streamlined hydrodynamic hull, the massive battery capacity for high underwater speed, and the snorkel for sustained submerged operations, became the blueprint for the first generation of post-war submarines around the world. The Soviet Whiskey class, of which hundreds were built, was a direct derivative. The American Tang class and the British Porpoise class incorporated its lessons on hull design and silent running. For nearly 15 years, until the dawn of the nuclear age, the Type 21 defined what a submarine was. It was the crucial evolutionary link between the submersibles of World War II and the true submarines of the Cold War. The sunken ghost of the Kriegsmarine never won its battle, but its technological spirit would haunt the deep oceans for decades to come, a testament to a revolution that arrived just moments too late. And that concludes this story about the sunken ghost. If you want to learn more about World War II, subscribe, like, and share. Also, leave your anecdotes and ideas in the comment section.